There is a particular kind of frustration that feels heavier than failure. Failure at least has movement, it has direction. But stagnation, that sense of being stuck while time keeps moving, slowly erodes clarity, confidence, and identity. You wake up knowing you should advance, yet everything inside feels blocked. Effort doesn't flow, decisions feel delayed, momentum disappears, and the longer this state lasts, the more it convinces you that something is wrong with you. Most people assume feeling stuck means they lack motivation, discipline, or talent. That assumption is inaccurate and damaging. Stagnation is rarely a personal flaw. It is usually a systems problem. When systems collapse, energy has nowhere to go. When energy has nowhere to go, the mind interprets this as paralysis. The danger is not being stuck temporarily. The danger is normalizing stagnation and mistaking it for identity. When everything feels blocked, the mind does something predictable. It zooms out too far. It tries to solve life instead of the next step. It demands clarity about the entire future before allowing movement in the present. And because that clarity never fully arrives, action is postponed indefinitely. This is where the first strategy begins, not with action, but with scope. The human mind locks up when problems are framed at the wrong scale. Too large, and the system overloads. Too vague, and it drifts. Progress requires precision of scale, not force of will. When everything feels stuck, it is because your current problem definition is too big for your available cognitive resources. You are asking the mind to move mountains when it needs to move pebbles. The first strategy is deceptively simple. Shrink the problem until movement becomes unavoidable. Most people ask, how do I move forward? That question is paralyzing because it assumes forward is a single, unified direction. In reality, forward is fragmented. It is composed of dozens of micro-movements, none of which feel impressive on their own. The correct question is not, how do I fix this? It is, what is the smallest action that changes the state, even slightly? Stagnation survives on sameness. Any change, however small, breaks the loop. When you take a minimal action, you send a critical signal to the nervous system. Movement is possible. That signal matters more than the result of the action itself. The brain does not need success to regain momentum. It needs proof of mobility. This is why people often feel better after doing something trivial, organizing a desk, replying to one message, adjusting one variable. These actions are not productive in isolation. They are regulatory. They restore the sense of agency. Agency is the antidote to stagnation. Notice how different this is from motivation culture. You're not waiting to feel driven. You are creating motion first. Motion precedes motivation, not the other way around. When everything feels stuck, do not look for meaning. Look for movement. This is uncomfortable because the ego wants significance. It wants actions that feel worthy. But the system does not care about worthiness. It cares about state change. A small action that feels almost pointless is often the most effective intervention. It bypasses resistance because it does not threaten identity. It does not demand commitment. It simply introduces motion into a static system. Once motion exists, the system reorganizes naturally. If this idea resonates, pause for a moment and observe where you might be overestimating the size of the step required to move forward. That overestimation is often the invisible wall. Reflect on it. If you feel compelled, share that insight. Articulating it reduces its power. The second strategy addresses a different but equally common cause of stagnation: internal congestion. Most people who feel stuck are not empty. They are overloaded. Too many open loops, too many unresolved decisions, too many internal demands competing for limited attention. When everything is important, nothing moves. The mind can only advance one priority at a time. When forced to juggle many, it defaults to inaction as a protective response. This is not laziness, it is overload management. The second strategy is ruthless clarity, reducing active focus to a single dominant objective, not the most urgent, not the most impressive, the most stabilizing. Progress requires constraint. When you remove constraint, the system collapses into noise. Choosing one primary focus does not mean abandoning everything else. It means temporarily demoting them. You are not deciding what matters forever. You are deciding what matters now. This distinction is critical. People resist this strategy because it feels like loss. They fear that by focusing on one thing, they are neglecting others. In reality, they are already neglecting all of them by being spread too thin. Stagnation is often the cost of refusing to choose. Once a single priority is selected, something subtle happens. The mind relaxes. Cognitive load drops. Energy consolidates. Decisions become simpler because they can be filtered through one question. Does this serve the current focus? This filtering effect restores momentum almost immediately. You do not need clarity about your entire life to move forward. You need clarity about what gets your energy next. Everything else can wait. If this challenges you, notice why. Often the resistance comes from fear of choosing wrong. But stagnation is not neutral. It is a choice with a cost, a hidden one. Choosing one direction, even temporarily, is less dangerous than remaining inert. If this second strategy is bringing something into focus, take a moment to sit with it. Ask yourself what you have been trying to carry all at once, and what would happen if you allowed yourself to set most of it down. That reflection alone can loosen the grip of stagnation. Now comes the third strategy, the one most people avoid because it confronts a deeper truth. Feeling stuck is often not about lack of options. It is about unresolved internal conflict. Part of you wants to move. Another part wants safety, certainty, or validation first. These parts pull in opposite directions, and the result is immobility. The system freezes not because it cannot act, but because acting would force a loss of comfort, of identity, of imagined outcomes. The third strategy is not about forcing action. It is about resolving internal contradiction. Progress becomes possible only when you identify what you are secretly protecting by staying stuck. This requires honesty. Ask yourself this without judgment. What benefit does stagnation provide right now? Protection from failure? Protection from judgment? Protection from making the wrong choice? Stagnation often feels painful, but it is familiar, and familiarity feels safe to the nervous system. Once you identify what is being protected, movement no longer feels like self-betrayal. You can design actions that respect both needs, the need to advance and the need for safety. This is where most advice fails. It tells people to push through resistance instead of understanding it. Resistance exists for a reason. Ignoring it creates internal backlash. True progress integrates resistance instead of fighting it. You do not need to eliminate the part of you that wants to stay still. You need to reassure it, to show it that movement does not equal catastrophe. When that reassurance is present, action stops feeling like a threat. If you are still here, notice something important. Stagnation is not a verdict. It is feedback. It is telling you that scale is wrong, focus is diffused, or internal conflict is unresolved. Those are solvable problems. If this perspective is changing how you interpret being stuck, stay with it. Let it settle. Reflect on which of these strategies applies most directly to you right now. And if this is helping you reframe a state you've been trapped in, consider marking that realization, even privately. Awareness is the first form of movement. Stagnation does not end with a dramatic breakthrough. It ends with precise adjustments, repeated consistently. And once movement returns, clarity follows. The subtlety of being stuck is that it often disguises itself as necessity. You convince yourself that waiting is strategic, that preparation is critical, that timing must be perfect. But this is rarely true. Waiting only amplifies the perception of blockage. The mind begins to construct reasons why movement is impossible, each one logical, each one seductive, and before long you feel trapped, not because you are incapable, but because you have trained your attention to notice obstacles more than opportunities. This is why small wins matter. Momentum does not arrive from dramatic leaps. It arrives from the accumulation of minor, deliberate actions that confirm, I can move. I can change state. I can advance. These actions do not require courage in the heroic sense. They require consistency and observance. They require noticing resistance without overreacting. The first strategy, shrinking the problem, Works because it creates immediate, achievable action. Each micro-step becomes evidence against the perception of immobility. The brain records, action is possible. The nervous system releases tension, and confidence begins to rebuild quietly, below the level of conscious awareness. The second strategy, narrowing focus, works because it reduces cognitive load. When attention is fragmented across too many competing priorities, energy is dissipated. The mind oscillates between tasks, evaluating each, anticipating outcomes, rehearsing contingencies. In this oscillation, paralysis thrives. By prioritizing one objective, you create a channel for energy to flow. Stagnation retreats, replaced by directed movement. The third strategy, resolving internal conflict, works because it addresses the invisible barriers that stop you even when the first two strategies are applied. Desire to move and desire for safety coexist uneasily. One dominates in theory, the other dominates in practice. The tension itself immobilizes. Only by identifying the internal negotiation and reassuring each part, showing that action is safe enough, that failure is survivable, that choice does not equate to loss, does the system release its grip. Movement becomes both permissible and inevitable. There is an important pattern here. All three strategies rely on creating conditions for the nervous system to register safety and capability. Action, focus, and reconciliation are not about brute force. They are about signaling to the body and mind that mobility is possible, risk is bounded, and energy can flow without threat. Many people underestimate the psychological precision required. The smallest misalignment, overestimating risk, overloading attention, ignoring internal dissent, can recreate stagnation almost instantly. That is why repeated application, reflection, and calibration are critical. These strategies are not one-time fixes. They are processes that train the system to operate under uncertainty, under tension, and under resistance. Notice too how this changes the relationship with time. Stagnation often feels timeless. Hours bleed into days, days into weeks, yet the sense of progress is absent. By breaking problems into micro-steps, reducing cognitive load, and reconciling internal conflict, you collapse perceived time. Action gives temporal structure. Focus clarifies priority. Reconciliation stabilizes perception. Suddenly, the day contains measurable movement again. There is also a subtle emotional transformation. Stagnation often carries guilt, self-criticism, and frustration. These emotions further bind energy and attention. As the strategies are applied, emotions shift. Anxiety reduces because small actions prove capability. Frustration reduces because priorities clarify. Guilt reduces because internal dissent is acknowledged rather than ignored. Emotional energy is freed to support forward motion rather than resist it. If you are observing this in yourself, pause for a moment. Reflect on the micro-actions you have delayed. Identify one you can execute immediately. Notice the friction it produces, the small resistance, and proceed despite it. The point is not to solve everything. The point is to confirm that movement is possible. Then, examine your current priorities. Which objective, if pursued exclusively for the next period of time, would restore focus and energy? Set aside the others temporarily. Observe how this single concentration begins to streamline attention, reduce internal debate, and re-establish control over scattered resources. Finally, identify one internal conflict that has been silently immobilizing you. What are you protecting? How might you reassure that part of yourself that movement is safe, that failure does not threaten identity, that incremental action is sufficient? Speak to that part clearly, internally, and proceed. Together, these strategies create a loop. Small action generates evidence, focus channels energy, reconciliation neutralizes resistance. This loop is self-reinforcing. Each iteration strengthens the nervous system's expectation that movement is possible, decisions are manageable, and the world is navigable even when uncertainty exists. If this process resonates, take a moment to commit to one immediate step. Share it with yourself or with someone else. Articulating intention converts abstract possibility into concrete commitment. This simple act alone begins to dissolve the perception of being trapped. Momentum does not arrive fully formed. It is built iteratively. Awareness is the first tool, deliberate action is the second, and internal alignment is the third. When combined, they generate the flow that replaces stagnation with movement, hesitation with decision, and paralysis with progress. The key insight to remember: being stuck is never permanent unless allowed to be. Conditions, not courage alone, determine whether you remain frozen or advance. And these conditions, scale, focus, and internal coherence, can always be engineered, even in the most resistant environments. The final piece of this framework addresses the unseen feedback loops that often reinforce stagnation without your awareness. When you are stuck, the mind constantly rehearses failure scenarios, imagined consequences, and past mistakes. Each rehearsal strengthens the neural pathways of hesitation. Each imagined obstacle becomes a mini barrier to movement. Over time, these internal simulations solidify into an expectation of immobility. To disrupt this, you must consciously interrupt the rehearsal cycle. This is not suppression. Suppression only buries the fear and strengthens it subconsciously. The method is redirection. The mind is given a specific, bounded problem to solve immediately, one that is both achievable and measurable. The act of solving, even partially, sends a corrective signal. The world is not static. The system is not paralyzed. Progress is possible. Consider the analogy of a clogged conduit. The water does not need force, it needs a channel. The first microstep is the opening. The second is the focused flow. The third is alignment of the entire conduit. If all three are executed in sequence, even slowly, the current resumes. Stagnation collapses under the pressure of system integrity. There is also a subtle temporal effect to consider. When everything feels blocked, time appears elongated. Hours feel heavier. Decisions feel weightier. The mind perceives no forward vector. By applying these three strategies, you are not only creating movement in action, but movement in perception. The day itself becomes navigable again. You regain a sense of rhythm. You regain the ability to measure cause and effect. Time regains its functional structure. The strategies reinforce one another. Shrinking the problem creates immediate actionable steps, which alleviates the paralysis of overwhelm. Narrowing focus channels the energy liberated by these small actions toward the highest impact objective. Resolving internal conflict ensures that the nervous system does not sabotage progress through self-protective hesitation. The synergy produces a cumulative effect. Each movement strengthens the next. Each decision validates capability. Each step restores agency. Observe how this approach changes your internal dialogue. Stagnation often comes with an invisible critic, whispering that nothing will work, that delay is rational, that caution is mandatory. When these strategies are applied consistently, the critic loses authority. Its statements are acknowledged but no longer decisive. The internal environment shifts from one of reactive fear to proactive deliberation. It is important to note that these strategies do not eliminate discomfort. They do not promise an absence of uncertainty, risk, or error. What they do accomplish is control over response. The mind no longer interprets every signal as a threat or every delay as evidence of inadequacy. Instead, uncertainty is navigated, resistance is understood, and action becomes habitual, deliberate, and sustainable. If this resonates with you, pause and consider a current situation in your own life where you feel frozen. Map it onto these three strategies. Ask yourself, can I reduce the scale? Can I focus energy on a single objective? Can I reconcile internal conflict that has been silently immobilizing me? Identifying these points is the first form of movement. Naming them alone reduces their grip. As you continue this process, you may notice something subtle. Small victories begin to accumulate. The mind registers success incrementally, neural pathways of paralysis weaken, and the perception of impossibility diminishes. The initial friction that seemed insurmountable begins to feel manageable. Confidence, not the inflated kind but the structural, evidence-based kind, emerges. And here is the final insight. Progress is iterative, not instantaneous. Each micro-action, each refocused priority, each reconciled conflict does not produce a monumental leap. It produces a shift in system dynamics. Over time, these shifts aggregate into meaningful movement. The feeling of being blocked diminishes not because obstacles vanish, but because your capacity to navigate them expands. This is the essence of advancing when everything seems frozen. Understand the problem scale, direct energy with clarity, and align internal priorities. Apply these continuously. Observe, reflect, adjust, repeat. Momentum is not a gift. It is an engineered consequence of disciplined, precise action under conditions of uncertainty. If this framework has illuminated your understanding of being stuck, consider committing to one micro step, right now. Take immediate action within the smallest achievable scope. Let it demonstrate possibility to your nervous system. Notice the subtle shift in perception. Let it anchor your sense of agency. Momentum, once restored, transforms the landscape of decision-making. What seemed impossible becomes feasible. Complexity is reduced to actionable components. Hesitation no longer dictates behavior. You reclaim both time and attention. And with practice, the state of being stuck becomes a temporary feedback signal, not a permanent condition. The last element to understand is the role of self-perception in maintaining or dissolving stagnation. When everything feels blocked, it is common to interpret the state as evidence of personal inadequacy. I am not capable. I am not disciplined. I am failing. This internal narrative compounds the feeling of being stuck, creating a feedback loop where inaction reinforces negative self-assessment and negative self-assessment reinforces inaction. Breaking this loop requires separating self-perception from immediate performance. Your value is not measured by every decision or outcome. It is measured by the consistency of your engagement with the system, your willingness to act despite resistance, to apply structure, and to resolve conflict. Each intentional micro-step reinforces the truth. You are capable of navigating complexity, regardless of the scale of visible progress. Consider how this reframing affects risk assessment. Stagnation often magnifies perceived risk. Every potential outcome is evaluated through the lens of worst-case projection. The mind inflates consequences to justify inactivity. By executing the three strategies, scaling problems, narrowing focus, reconciling internal conflict, you produce evidence that action does not inevitably lead to catastrophe. The nervous system recalibrates, risk perception becomes more accurate, and the energy previously consumed by exaggerated threat is redirected into movement. There is also an emotional recalibration. Chronic stagnation often comes with suppressed frustration, subtle anxiety, and internal tension. When micro-actions succeed, even incrementally, those emotions are released in controlled ways. Relief signals are sent, reinforcing the perception that action is safe and effective. Emotional energy, once locked in resistance, becomes fuel for further progress. Another critical insight is the importance of monitoring feedback loops continuously. Systems that generate stagnation are rarely static. New pressures, conflicting priorities, and internal doubts continually emerge. The three strategies are not one-time interventions. They are ongoing maintenance processes. Regular evaluation of problem scale, focus, and internal alignment ensures that new blockages are detected early and addressed before they accumulate into immobility. Notice the subtle shift in perception over time. Tasks that once seemed monumental are reframed as sequences of manageable steps. Priorities that once seemed conflicting are clarified. Internal voices that once argued for inaction are recognized as signals to be addressed, not authorities to obey. The system evolves from reactive paralysis to proactive navigation. Importantly, this framework teaches resilience under uncertainty. Life rarely presents perfect conditions for movement. Resistance, ambiguity, and conflict are inevitable. The measure of progress is not the absence of these factors, but the ability to act consistently within them. Action, therefore, becomes a proof of competence rather than a measure of guaranteed success. Reflect on your own experience. Where have you been waiting for conditions to be ideal before taking a step? Recognize that perfect conditions rarely exist. The only reliable path forward is to create movement within the constraints and uncertainties that exist now. Each step, however small, accumulates into momentum. Finally, consider the broader implication. Mastery over stagnation is mastery over self-governance. By consistently applying these strategies, you demonstrate to yourself that you can navigate complexity, resolve conflict, and direct energy even in the presence of resistance. This internal authority is far more stabilizing than motivation alone. It allows action to occur without fear of judgment or failure, because each movement is calibrated, bounded, and intentional. If this understanding resonates, pause and identify one area in your life where you have been immobilized. Apply the 3 strategies deliberately. Shrink the problem to its smallest actionable component. Concentrate energy on the most stabilizing priority, and reconcile internal conflicts that have been holding you back. Execute one micro-step immediately. Observe the subtle shift it produces. Let that shift anchor a new pattern of consistent progress. Stagnation is not permanent. Momentum is engineered. Agency is recoverable. And once these principles are internalized, the state of being stuck becomes not a prison, but a signal, a reminder that micro-action, clarity, and internal alignment are required and entirely within your control.